Please be seated. In 1943, English author and well-known mystery writer Dorothy Sayers wrote a series of dramas based upon the life of Christ. In the play entitled The Man Born to be King, she wrote these words: "I speak for a sorrowful people, for the ignorant and the poor. We rise up to labor and lie down to sleep, and night is only a pause between one burden and another. Fear is our daily companion, the fear of want, the fear of war, the fear of cruel death, and of still more cruel life. But all this we could bear if we knew that we did not suffer in vain, that God was beside us in the struggle, sharing the miseries of his own world. For the riddle that torments the world is this: shall sorrow and love be reconciled at last when the promised kingdom comes? Yes, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son to be born for us." Welcome to Rye England Sunday. I've been saying that phrase over and over again for the last 2 weeks, making sure I would get it right. The tradition, as you know, dates back to 1942 when Christ Church Rye promised to stand in prayer and solidarity with St. Mary the Virgin in Rye, England, and all in the midst of World War II, the war that took over 60 million lives. It's a tradition that remains unbroken through the years, and a tradition that always takes place during Advent. I don't know why Advent was chosen, but Advent seems the perfect time to me. It's a time of looking ahead in hope, hope that God is faithful, that peace and justice will one day prevail through all the earth. I served a parish that had a tradition of a special Advent calendar that was distributed to every member every year. And it always started with this: big, bold letters artfully drawn in calligraphy. Shh. Be quiet. It's Advent. It's sweet. And it may be partially true that we should be quiet. It's Advent. But I think only partially. Every year, Advent sends us back to the beginning of the story of Jesus. My friend Martin Smith likes to put it this way. He says, "What does the beginning tell us?" It tells us that in the beginning of time, there came a tipping point in creation and in history. Tipping point is a fairly modern phrase. It means something like pressure builds up over time, something breaks, or something is revealed. Fullness of time is a biblical phrase. It literally means this. It literally means God reached a fullness. God reached capacity. And looking at the world God had created, God's heart, so filled with compassionate love, reached the tipping point, reached the fullness and broke. And out of God's heart flowed compassion, mercy, a passionate love spilled forth. Not the kind of love we see in a Hallmark card, but more the kind of love like this. A woman sees her child fall into a stream with a raging current and being swept away. She doesn't have time to think, she only responds. Without thinking of the danger to herself, she dives into the roiling water and saves her child while people look on, amazed at the love she's showing. And she saves her child even at the cost of her own life. That's the love that enters the world in a strikingly personal way. And that love is a person, because that love is the one we know as Jesus. Shh, be quiet. It's Advent. I'm not so sure. Next week, Jen is going to have to preach on the passage from John the Baptist. Not such a quiet man. You brood of vipers. Who told you to flee from the wrath to come? He's saying the time is now. Wake up. Put your phone and your tablet screens away. See what's happening in our midst. See what God is up to, even in the midst of the mess we've created. And John the Baptist is effective, but he gets one thing wrong. It's not wrath that's coming into the world. It's sacrificial love in the form of a flesh and blood human being who only in hindsight we will understand to be God's heart broken open for us and for the whole world. And I mean the whole world. The Buddhist tradition teaches us that we need to develop what's called a beginner's mind. No matter how old and wise we may be, we all need to develop our beginner's mind. We need to return to a childlike mind, not to be childlike, except in this instance, in this way. We need to have a mind that can be surprised. We need to have a mind that can stand or kneel or sit in awe. We need to be blown away. And sometimes in our maturity, we lose that capacity, don't we? So today, open your heart to the heart that is broken open for you. That might be Advent in a nutshell. In the Song of Zechariah, so beautifully chanted by the choir, we hear, in the tender compassion of our God, the dawn from on high shall break upon us, to shine on those who dwell in darkness and the shadow of death, and to guide our feet into the way of peace. And in the 3rd chapter of Luke's Gospel, we hear this oddly long list of names and titles and the places they're connected to. It used to be, it was an old seminary question on a, spot test. Name all the leaders that are named in Luke 3, verses 1 through 3. I was a total failure at that. Luke is doing it not to provide torture for professors in the future. No, Luke provides all of this historical information because he wants us to know that this story, the story of Jesus, is not a once-upon-a-time fairy tale. We're not in Disney World. He's not Luke Skywalker. And so he places the birth of Jesus in a particular time that can be looked up and verified. And then we learn that John the Baptist's work, his voice, today anyway, is to tell us that the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. That's his work. Make God's path straight. Every valley shall be filled, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough ways made smooth, and all flesh shall see the salvation of God. Shh. Be quiet. It's Advent. Except in this reading, there's an earthquake happening. There's a revolution of typography. All obstacles are being removed. I imagine that makes some noise. So now is the time. Open yourselves to the reckless love of God made known to us in Jesus. Now is the time for each and every one of us, as we begin again the church year with a beginner's mind, to try to see it and live it more authentically. Many years ago, in a parish I served, I was present for the rehearsals and then the Christmas pageant that the kids put on. You know, it happens everywhere, right? It will happen here next week. And during the rehearsals, the two little girls who were appointed to be the innkeepers, I guess we were short of boys, so it wasn't a boy and a girl, but two girls, they had their cardboard, gate that was at the back of the church at the end of a pew. And when Mary and Joseph would come up, and Joseph would knock on the door and say, is there any room in the inn? The two little girls were well trained to say, no, there's no room for you. And they said it just like that. I mean, it was great. So then arrived the day of the pageant itself. And everything was going according to plan until Joseph knocked on the door. And the one little girl, nasty as she can be, no, you're not getting in here. You're from Nazareth. But the other little girl must have had a vision, because she said, come in, there's lots of room. There's lots of room. And the director of the pageant, who was like on her haunches trying to coach kids as they went along, she's whispering the words, no, there's no room, there's no room. But the little girl persisted. There is lots of room, come on in. Everyone froze. What about the stable and the cows and the sheep and the straw waiting up ahead? If they're going into that pew, what are we going to do with all of that? Somehow it worked itself out. But the little girl never relented. She got it. She got it. She understood that God was breaking into this world and that her response was to make room. And that's our response. Our response to this revolution, to this breaking of God's heart, is to make room for the love that is being poured on us and around us. And that's harder than we sometimes think it might be. Make room. This morning we will sing the beloved hymn, Jerusalem, a beautiful tune with the William Blake words. And I did watch last year's sermon by Kate, and she confirmed my opinion that nobody really knows what the words mean. But we love them nonetheless. But at my request, the last hymn we sing is also going to be to the tune Jerusalem. But it's in the 1982 hymnal, has been there all those years. And the words are words by Carl Dahl, although they're not really his words. He took the words from various points of Scripture, from the Hebrew Scriptures to the Christian Scriptures. They're words of hope and faith, words of peace, and words of a longing for reconciliation. O day of peace that dimly shines through all our hopes and prayers and dreams. I hope it will become a standard here at Christ Church, if it isn't already. We will leave singing of God's hoped-for gift of peace. May it increase our resolve to be that peace. Dorothy Sayers said, all this we could bear if we knew that we did not suffer in vain, that God was beside us in the struggle, sharing the miseries of his own world. For the riddle that torments the world is this: shall sorrow and love be reconciled at last when the promised kingdom comes? Yes, For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son,